Welcome to How's That Working For You, a podcast for the therapy curious. I'm your host, Dr. Zoe Krupka. If you're working in one of the many fields of mental health, we've made this space for you. Come join us in some reflection on these often very strange jobs that we do, in the hope that we can really get to the heart of how to improve our work and our own sense of how to be who we are within it. This podcast is brought to you by the Cairn Miller Institute. Cairn Miller is founded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their deep and enduring connection to land, waters, and community. The legacies of colonization and the ongoing effects of institutional racism have enduring impacts on the mental health and well-being of First Nations people, and we hold this continuing dispossession in our minds and hearts as we explore the question of how to improve our work in the mental health field. Ari Heart is a trans, non-binary person, a psychotherapist, a parent, an educator, and co-founder of Trans Wellbeing. Trans Wellbeing provides support and education to therapists working with trans clients, and also supports parents of trans people through a course and group program. Ari's interest and dedication is in providing the world information that goes well beyond the foundation of trans inclusion and respect, but which makes inclusion and respect come intuitively and authentically. And Ari, you're also a alumni of Cairn Miller.
I am. It's nice to be back here.
Oh, it's good to have you. I think one of the first things that I wanted to ask you, even though from my own perspective the answer would be almost nothing, is how well you felt prepared working in your own community with the training that you've had. You know, what was it like to go out there with what you'd learned?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like any therapist going into the practice after training feels unprepared in general. I had a great interest in working with trans people and trans clients, and in some ways, in terms of rapport building, I felt prepared, and that went well. But there were certain areas of the work with trans clients that I found very humbling, and one in particular was working with trans clients on their experience of dysphoria or their relationship to their body and how they navigate being trans in the world as an embodied person. And I distinctly remember some of the first times that I was having conversations with clients around that and feeling completely stumped for what to say, even though I had a huge amount of lived experience with dysphoria. And since then have spoken to a number of other trans therapists who also had that experience of feeling like they were not equipped at all.
So almost like there's this kind of expectation of a shared experience to somehow give you some facility to talk about this complicated embodied experience.
Absolutely.
And at the same time you're sitting there thinking, I've got no idea.
Yeah.
No idea how to respond to you. And
I certainly have an idea about what that might feel like, even though everybody's experience is a little bit different. There's a lot of overlap. But I didn't have a solid conceptual foundation to make sense of a pathway forward for my clients. And I certainly, over the years, developed kind of disparate, I suppose, interventions that seemed to work. But it took a long time for me to figure out how to conceptualize dysphoria in a way that was clinically helpful and practical and actionable, and where I could really feel like I was helping. And instead of, it's helpful to offer companionship in an experience, and for someone to feel heard, that's really huge and shouldn't be minimized. But I really wanted to be able to offer a kind of care that enabled people to feel meaningfully more at ease in themselves, instead of just less alone in the experience.
Yes. Yeah. It's, when we talked first about you coming on and speaking to us on the program, the thing that really struck me about our conversation about dysphoria was the way that you described, and I agree with you, the way that psychotherapy training in particular locates the problem within the person. And this has been so strongly my experience as well, that we're really trained with the classic kind of, and how do you feel about that, in a million versions. And I'm not saying that's not helpful or that things are not carried individually, but you were talking really about, well, how do we deal with something that really exists outside, is coming from the outside?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the many ways that, as with any kind of population that we work with clinically, the unique themes or topics that come up are always interlinked with the broader work of psychotherapy. And it's not unique to have issues which are stemming from external problems, but which as a therapist you're kind of treating on an individual internal basis. Like someone experiences a trauma and we treat it, and we treat kind of the symptoms of that trauma, that PTSD or that trauma. It's an external issue fundamentally. It's an experience in that person's life in the world. Or if we work with someone on their experience of racism, which is absolutely, but is internalized or is felt internally. I think one of the things that definitely wasn't in the training, and that I don't see in any therapist training, kind of professional development training, is an exploration of what dysphoria is and how to clinically help people with that. I just mean in therapy.
Yeah. How to respond
Yeah.
effectively.
And dysphoria is so poorly understood. And I think because of the pathologization of trans people, it's understood as an internal issue. It's understood as something that exists inside a person, a discrepancy inside a person, or a conflict inside a person that then causes them to identify as trans. So the misunderstanding is someone has an experience of an internal discrepancy, which we call gender dysphoria in the DSM-5, and that internal discrepancy or conflict between quote-unquote brain versus body means that they're trans, where actually what is happening is the person is trans in that their gender is, their experience of themselves as a gendered human isn't what was anticipated for them based on their sex assigned at birth. And one of the symptoms of being trans in a not trans-centered world is an experience of dysphoria, which is the distress of having internalized norms which don't make room for trans people and trans bodies.
What a great summary. And you were worried about being able to put that in.
It's hard to make
Clearly.
it succinct, but there you go.
But that's such a big thing that you are saying there, because you're talking about training across the board, counseling training, psychotherapy training, psychology training, psychiatry training, with our own professions that are mislocating, not just mislocating the problem within the person, but seeing the problem as created internally, and in fact kind of inherently pathologizing the experience, so that in therapy the best that you can hope for as a trans person is to solve your own internal conflict. That is a result of something that is almost like cracked inside.
But to understand that that's not the case, to truly understand that, the learning of the therapist or of the person trying to depathologize their view of trans people has to include a cracking of their conceptualization of what gender is, which is no wonder then that it's not featured in psychotherapy training, because that's quite a big piece of work to undertake, to try to pull apart your kind of learned understanding of what gender is and how it functions. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many sort of trans inclusion trainings remain kind of superficial, I think, and remain kind of moralistic, and sort of leverage trans suffering as a pity card almost, to say we have to be inclusive and respectful to trans people, because trans people suffer, and here are all the ways that trans people suffer, and here are all the terrible stats, and kind of calling on the compassion or the pity of the learners, rather than saying there is no example of any living system that exists in a simplified binary way as we think of gender being. And you can't have a system as rigid and oppositional as the cisgender gender binary and not have humans that can't, and not have humans that feel unable to live within that system.
Yeah. So really, if you're talking about cracking, there are whole systems that need to crack.
Yeah.
And the therapists who are working with trans people, that has to crack for us.
That's part
as
of the
well.
work.
Yeah, and so you're talking about kind of, I think, training which basically reinforces that idea of that inherent split within trans people, and that suffering should be accommodated or made room for.
Yeah.
And really that's, I think you're saying that's kind of, it just perpetuates the whole, that not just a system of exclusion, but that misapprehension of who's broken, as opposed to how rigid the system is, which so many people suffer within.
Yeah,
how do you do that?
Perpetuates the sort of secret belief that people don't speak, but they do have, that when they work with a trans person and they haven't worked on their conceptualization of what gender is, that they're thinking, and they may not admit it, but they're thinking, this is a person who is, quote unquote, a man or a male person who thinks that they are a woman. And that we know from evidence that the best outcomes for this person who is a male person who thinks that they're a woman is to treat them as a woman, and so we will do that because that's what we know, understand from the evidence works for their mental health and well-being. And no, that's not right. Actually, that person is a woman, and you have to relearn what the body means, how you're interpreting the body as being a gendered physical form.
Yeah, it's when we were talking before, I told you a little kind of story, or a little experience I had about the body, which is something, I guess, as a cisgender woman, that when I realized that my feeling about my body was not something I was individually in control of. That
Can you share that? Because it's a great story.
Yeah. That I moved here in 1990, and I was 24, and I didn't shave my armpits, didn't shave my legs. I was a hairy person. There are hairy people in Canada, probably because it's cold most of the time. It really seems quite dumb to remove your hair all the time. But honestly, I did not see women without hair in this country anywhere.
Women with hair.
Nothing. Women with hair in this country. I didn't see them anywhere. And in fact, I had little kids point at me on the bus, talk about me. And it took me really literally about 48 hours to start feeling disgusting, to start seeing my body in a different way.
Disgusting is such a good word.
Disgusting.
For that.
Yeah. And I really had thought, I'm this, I'm a feminist. This is great. I this is what I do, and I'm fine with it. And realized, actually, I can't be fine alone. I really can't, unless I find some other hairy. Alone. I can't be fine alone.
Yeah.
Unless I'm around other hairy creatures like myself, which I wasn't, I can't be fine.
I think this is also why we can't really take credit for our own personal growth.
No.
We are.
It's so sad.
I know. We're so. I feel very well as a trans person, and it's entirely thanks to my context that I'm in. And my context was intentional to some degree, and privileged to some degree, and luck to some degree. But if I remove myself from the context that I'm in and go into an environment that is less trans positive, trans affirming, I know that I would feel more dysphoria immediately. And when I do go into different contexts I do notice more dysphoria. And in my life, in my regular life that I've curated and been lucky to be in, I really don't feel that way very much at all. But the thing that so the wonderful thing, however, of having a context that is so affirming and where I don't feel that, is that when I then step out of that, or if I was to lose that somehow and experience greater dysphoria again, which is, I believe, the I'm disgusting and wrong thing, then at least I know cognitively this is not inherently inside me. Like, I can take some distance from it. It doesn't mean that I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
I'm still feeling it, but it's almost like I can take, there's a higher part of me that's able to observe that and respond to that. So there's still the feeling, but then there's a dialogue inside, rather than me just merging with that part that believes I'm disgusting and listening to it and believing it and being kind of a passive passenger to that part of me that thinks. And I think that's part of the healing work of doing trans therapy, is like helping someone develop the capacity to locate it as external, to have compassion for the internal feeling of that external issue in themselves, because we can't be fine alone, and to help them curate a life where they mostly don't have to be alone, and where they mostly are in a context that supports them.
Yeah.
And that takes time, and it's a lot of work.
And you're talking, I think, about a process that doesn't get a lot of attention in psychotherapy. I mean, certainly there are ideas of witnessing, of cognitive reframing, but not really what you're describing, which is, I think, if I've got this right, I can't ever just internalize this experience. I have to cognitively take it with me to be able to say, oh, I'm experiencing this dysphoria because I'm out of this context. I'm out of this place where I experience real connection and where I can really be authentic. And that's helpful because it takes away the extra suffering of what the hell is wrong with me. Why can't I just carry this wherever I go? It's sort of, I don't know, I think about it as a kind of rugged individualism that somehow crept into psychotherapy, and I'm not sure how it got there.
Well, so there's a metaphor that I really find helpful in describing the work of doing the external work and the internal work around dysphoria, and I think this is true for probably other issues as well. But if we think about if we were to have a huge kind of pipe burst and there's water pouring out, that's the force of the external. So the pipe is burst and it's pouring out. If we were to only do internal work to try to heal our internalized transphobia and kind of just feel okay about ourselves, even though we're met by the force of this external, in this case, what I would call cis normativity or transphobia, or the lack of trans representation, then that would be akin to, there's this huge pipe, it's burst, there's water pouring everywhere, and I've got a towel and I'm trying to mop it up on the ground. And it's going to be constant work, and it's going to be exhausting, and I'm going to feel like I'm failing all the time. And if we were to instead attend to the problem, which is the burst pipe, and mend it, at the very least to reduce the flow, if not to fix the issue, then we can do the internal work of mopping the floor to go, okay, what's left of this mess? And what needs to be cleaned up inside me so that there's not shit everywhere left from this issue. And so as a therapist, I'm always looking for this person that I'm, often in a first session, I'm sort of making an assessment of where they're at in relation to their external life, and by that I mean who's in their life, how much support do they have, how many other trans people are there in their life, what are their beliefs about themselves, how are they feeling about being trans, and are they actively experiencing transphobia? Usually not, but it's not just direct transphobia that people are faced with, it's also indirect transphobia or direct and indirect cisnormativity. So there's like a whole range of things that we could call external stresses.
Yeah. that you're kind of
I'm
doing a mapping
yeah.
out how much of their is this in their life. How much of the burst pipe are they,
Exactly.
in front of, how much is
How
coming
forceful is that water right now for them? Because if it's still flowing, then the internal work, it's not that it doesn't happen, but that's not the priority.
Yeah.
And I think about working with dysphoria clinically being made up of this sort of three parts. One is mitigation, which is fixing the burst pipe.
Yep.
So mitigating the problem from occurring. That's, for trans people, mostly takes years.
Yes.
That's about
to curate
the life that's going to be,
yeah,
and to do the educational work around with the people around you that need to learn to get on board. It takes years.
Yeah.
And which is one of the reasons we do the parent program, because parents are so essential in that.
Yeah.
And then there's sort of moderation, which is when you are experiencing the distress of dysphoria, when you're actively in that I'm disgusting feeling, what can you do to take it down a notch? And that's really like kind of but there's a lot of things that are kind of counterintuitive in that, and that without healthy ways to moderate, then people tend to go to unhealthy ways to moderate.
So would it be right to say that this is almost like another way of understanding a trauma-informed lens, or in terms of this establishment of safety in a way as being slowing down the flow of that water?
Absolutely.
Before we go into your experience of, for instance, feeling disgusting and how we deal with that?
Yeah, so the third of the three parts of the framework is healing and recovery.
Yeah.
And that analogy of trauma is perfect because, and it's a trauma. But it's a complex trauma.
A lifelong trauma. Yeah.
And we do see that trans people have like greater levels of CPTSD.
Yes.
And so you're absolutely right. And I think that analogy is perfect, because if you're working with someone in a chronically traumatizing environment, you're not going to be doing healing and recovery work with them.
Yeah.
You're going to be doing a different kind of work that looks more like case management, looks more like helping them to feel entitled to getting to safety.
Yeah.
And to help them and to sort of mitigate like the internalization of what they're experiencing. And then and the moderation part is around helping them with nervous system regulation. And then the healing part, kind of traumatizing environment.
Yeah. Something that really, I suppose I really struggle with, I think as a therapist, with people experiencing all kinds of systemic aggression, and you kind of touched on it, is the education role. People seem not just that they're called to play, but required to play, really, in those around them. How do you deal with that with the people that you're working with, that they end up being the trans liaison officer at their work, unpaid and overloaded, with their families? What do you do with that? I find that kind of endlessly frustrating.
Yeah. I think I first start validate the fact that it is deeply unfair and also impossible, because at the time that a trans person is doing the most of that is earlier on, when they need the people around them to be moving the most and learning the most, which is also at a time when they still have the most internalized transphobia and they feel deeply humiliated, and also at a time when they don't yet have the language or the skill to do that teaching. And so then, and I see this a lot in the work with parents, is they tell me about the conversations they've had with their child, adult child, adolescent child, whatever it is, and I can hear that the trans child is trying to educate the parent with limited resources, with limited language, with limited awareness.
Yeah.
And while they're feeling deeply tender and humiliated and have a lot of shame and are therefore super defensive.
Yes.
And angry. Well, in the best possible case is that they're angry with their parent.
Yeah.
That means that they're safe. They feel safe to be angry. But the parents are understandably confused, walking on eggshells. They can't be being educated by their child. So I think about it a lot in terms of parents, because parents are some of the hardest people to educate, because they feel it's hard, it's challenging.
Yeah, we're awful. Parents are awful.
And the parent has internalized this false belief that they should be the teacher of their child, which is a huge pressure and not, in this case, possible.
So I think that's a really important, that's another, feels like, reframe of where the problem is located, which feels really useful. You know, when you're talking about working with parents, so often the child is sent to therapy as the problem. Being able to deal with the people who can take the pressure off, who can slow down some of that flow. And maybe you're also saying for us as psychotherapists too, to be able to support trans clients to redirect some of that, you know, where can education come?
Yes.
For
Delegate
their
it.
Delegate it for their families, for their workplaces.
Delegate it, and also it is just going to be a process to learn what are you comfortable in, what moments and in one context do you have the personal emotional resources and do you feel comfortable. I think I did a lot of educating in situations when I probably should have said no, because I was worried that the world won't move quickly enough for me to have a place in it as a non-binary person. And I felt like I did it here.
Of course.
Camilla.
I remember.
And I was not comfortable.
Yeah.
But I felt like I can't go into my second year of this master's with this lovely cohort of students being as clueless as they are.
Yes.
It was just so difficult.
So you provided a training.
So I did a training for them,
Yeah.
which is the first time I did a training for therapists. And I'm grateful to have done that because I discovered that I actually loved it.
Yeah.
And I've made kind of a career of it now. But at the time it was very uncomfortable to be the only trans person in the room doing that educational work and doing it clumsily.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Exactly. And with such high stakes, these are, you know, this is something I think that's hard for a lot of people to understand, that this kind of liaison role you're doing with your closest people, the people you study with, your family, your friends, you know, your work colleagues. It's full on. Yeah.
And like, to put context to that, I mean, this is, I think, Kenmel, really excellent training program, partly because there's real mature counselling happening between the students, not role play.
Yeah.
But what that meant as a trans person is I was being actively misgendered by the person who was supposed to be counselling me.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out, do I now say, I can't go on with this being vulnerable with you right now? And I think if I was to be in that situation now with the resources that I have now and the internal kind of resilience that I have now, which again is not my own doing, but like the context that I'm in.
Yes.
I would have not pretended that that was for their sake. I would have said, I want to provide you a training which will hopefully help your work, but I'm doing it because I need this, and not had this facade of this is...
See, that's so helpful. Like, I'm thinking again, like, in that role of therapist supporting someone, being able to say when you are doing this kind of, well, I think about it as kind of trans liaison work in one way or another, to be able to say, I need this. I need you to know this.
Which is more vulnerable.
Yeah.
But there's a corrosive effect of just performing as though you're okay.
Yes. And other people thinking, as you say, that they can come ask you at any time, that you're fine with it. Then you have their shame and distress to deal with as well, you know.
And, it's also more motivated by the relationships that they're in. They're not motivated by a moralistic position that says, you should know this because trans people matter. They don't care. We don't care. We're too busy. We have our own problems. But we care about the people that we know and like and are connected to and have authentic relationships with. And as a cohort, we were very close. I loved that group of people. And I think that it would have been very motivating for them to hear me say, I'm hurting here.
Yeah.
And I love this group. And it's important to me that I can be authentic and connected here. And one of the things that I often say to parents and also to trans clients is this formula that I was taught once by a kind of a coach, a relationship coach that I saw briefly. And it was, don't just say the thing, whether or not you're raising an issue or you're requesting something. Say why you're saying it, and the why has to include the fear and concern and the hope and intention. So first you say, I'm really worried to talk to you about this because I'm worried that you'll feel uncomfortable with me, or you'll walk on eggshells, or I'm worried because this conversation hasn't gone well in the past, or I'm worried. You're telling them that you're putting yourself out there for the sake of the relationship. And then you're saying the intention, which is also for the relationship. I want to feel close. I want to feel connected. I want to be able to be authentic with you. And then whatever you say is very hard to be defensive. It's very hard to dismiss. And then you say, how does that land? And doing that is terrifying, but it's so effective. And it's so much more effective than what trans people do, which is hide their vulnerability.
Yes.
And present a I'm fine attitude and say, you should, and it's not okay if you don't, and it's just coming out of fear of the pain. And it's fair enough, like it's not, I did that too, but the cost of that is that you actually lose connection and you're less authentic.
You know, what really sort of strikes me as you're saying that as well is, and I'm not sure if you've experienced this, but I feel much more in my own work with trans clients needing to take that position, to take those steps myself.
How do you mean?
To be more revealing of my own vulnerability in the relationship, my own concerns about raising things in session. And, you know, I think it's not only true with that population, but I think maybe that's something else we don't teach very much. I think we teach a lot about how to be responsive to potential ruptures in the relationship, but not a lot about being vulnerable as the therapist in terms of what our worry is in the relationship. And I think that's a real problem in this space, but I'm not sure what your thoughts are about that.
Yes, I think that trans people are very attuned to the discomfort of other people when it comes, like, in response to them. And I am certainly very attuned to other people's anxiety, to the point that I would rather hang out with someone who's obscenely inappropriate in response to me being trans and asks super inappropriate questions but has no shame.
But is totally comfortable
so
in that
comfortable
space. Yeah.
Than someone who is anxious. But because the people who are anxious also say inappropriate things, but you can't tell them because their shame they'll crumble.
Yeah.
Or it feels that way. And I'm not saying that everyone should just go ahead and say whatever inappropriate thing, but I'm saying if you're anxious, please own it.
Yeah.
To some degree. Like you might say,
I'm worried about saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I feel really ignorant in this space.
And one of the things that people do a lot, which I think is really well intentioned, but as therapists it might be useful to know, is that they'll acknowledge their not knowing or their ignorance, but they'll skim right over it. It's almost like they say it as a caveat, but then they bulldoze over their own discomfort, and it's very abrupt to experience. So if someone says something that they think might have been a little bit off, and they say, but I don't know the words, but I'm just, it's you know what I mean, and then they keep talking. It's the anxiety is palpable, but also the client's experience is there's no room for them. Whereas if a therapist is able to slow right down in that moment and go, actually, I don't know, that felt a bit clumsy. I'm sorry if that landed weird. And then pause in case the person wants to say something, and then say, I think what I'm trying to say is this, or, just slow down a little bit and allow the discomfort of their own unknowing, which as a therapist, one of the most important skills to not know and sit in that.
Yeah. But I think, we tend to teach it in a pretty abstract way. And I think that's the other thing you're saying, kind of from a trauma-informed perspective, I guess, is that therapist vulnerability, that making space to be wrong, to be uncomfortable, to acknowledge what's happening for us in the room in that moment is not something we teach a lot. And maybe that's the link, I suppose, that you're talking about with parents too, around the expectation that we know things or that we should pre-inform ourselves, and that moment that you're talking about of skating over our own mistakes and the anxiety about them is so alienating for both probably, but really feels very corrosive to that relationship.
Yeah, and for a therapist, I mean, as a client, you don't want to be thinking about your therapist's discomfort about you or their anxiety about the work. But if you see that they're taking care of it themselves and they're not afraid of their own discomfort, then you don't have to take care of it or avoid it.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a problem for a therapist to be uncomfortable at all and make that explicit, but the therapist has to make it clear that they are taking care of their own discomfort and that they're not uncomfortable with their own discomfort.
Yeah.
It's like it's not the discomfort that's a problem, it's the secondary response to it.
Yes.
Which is so often with everything the case, I think. But it's a skill, like it's a skill that I think we need to practice as therapists. And I think almost in those amateur counselling things, it might be a matter of someone saying, like, I'm listening to you and I really care about what you're saying and I want to understand what you're saying. I'm new at this and I feel a little nervous that I'm going to be clumsy in this reflection, so let me know how I go. And then reflecting, because we don't get taught that.
No.
And that would be, wow, so good. Because both of you know you're new to this. Everyone's terrified to give it a go. And I think that I do a lot of that the more I do counselling over the years, I've become more and more sort of process authentic.
Yes.
Like, for example, whatever's going on for me in terms of me trying to understand, I'll tend to say that because they feel it. So yesterday, for example, someone said a number of things that they were feeling about their gender, and I wasn't quite understanding the link between one of the things and the other thing, and I was pausing and I felt them going into shame, and I said, I'm just thinking about what you said because I'm not quite clear. I understand what you're saying, but the links are unclear to me, and either that's because I'm missing something or you're unclear, and either way, can we just stay here for a moment and explore it? And then they weren't in shame anymore. But if I hadn't been transparent about why I was pausing, they might have interpreted me as, well, this was a person who goes into shame easily. They would have interpreted me, I think, as not approving or thinking it was weird or something.
Well, you're talking about, too, I think, something really important that we don't talk about a lot. When you talk about the need for authenticity and connection, or we talk about the primary needs of children, or something that we don't talk about a lot, I think, is being understood, and the shame that we can experience when we're not understood, and when we see ourselves as kind of not understandable. So that feels really helpful, what you just talked about there, because it's kind of a reminder, I suppose, for me as an educator, but I think, for the psychotherapists who are going to be listening to this as well, to really focus on process, to not come into this kind of education and training, let's say, that you're providing, with this idea that I'm going to know the things and then I'm going to be a safe person, but that I'm going to be able to engage with this process with a better understanding, but I'm still going to have to be in the process.
Yes. The trouble is, you do have to, if you're working with trans clients as a therapist, know a little bit about the stumbling blocks. Like, you can't be, for example, if I didn't have some sense about gender and trans stuff, and every time I was unclear about a connection, said it, then there'd be a lot of educational burden on the client.
Yes.
I'm confident that I get it pretty well, so that if I'm unclear, maybe they're unclear, or I've simply just not understood the way that they've articulated it, or, it's not that I'm not still learning, I always am, but I don't think the core therapeutic skills carry you through in all situations.
Yeah.
Because we just have too much that we don't understand as a society about trans people. So one really, really key example is is an understanding about what femininity and masculinity is. I hear people talk about femininity and masculinity in the most frustrating ways that affect trans people deeply, and it even comes through like so-called specialists who do assessments and letter writing for surgery or hormones, where they misunderstand what those things are. Femininity isn't being more of a woman and masculinity being more of a man. These are simply a set of things that we associate with these genders based on our cultural and historic point that we're in. They're associations, and that is all.
Yeah.
And because they're associations, they become standards, and then because they're standards, we perform them, and then they become stronger associations. And there's a function to femininity and masculinity for trans people in that they use these things as signifiers. Like, if I want to avoid being gendered as a woman, I will use masculinity as a way to non-verbally express that. But trans people also shouldn't need to express femininity and masculinity in normative ways, and sometimes want to, because there's safety in that, but often don't. For example, if you've been raised as a girl and there's aspects of femininity that you've had access to and been permitted to have, and you enjoyed those particular aspects of femininity, like makeup, for example, felt playful, it felt expressive, and then you discover that you're actually not a woman, and suddenly you're expected not to ever wear makeup again. There are like losses.
Yes.
And yet, if a trans person wears makeup, their family, their therapist, certainly their psychiatrist is going to think that they're not really trans man, or they're not really non-binary, because they're doing this thing that we associate with women. So there are certain things that we have to unlearn as people and therapists.
And that we need to know. I think when you're talking about the knowledge that we need to have, that internal experience is coming from the client, but the understanding of the external, and that's a kind of an important one that you're talking about, that certainly in the research about trans experiences in the workplace, for instance, people talk about getting advice.
Oh.
Yeah, around their presentation. So something about, the understanding of the external context that we need to have as therapists is really, really important. And as you say, we can't be getting that from our clients. We are very close to time. So I suppose what I'm going to ask you is if you think we missed. I'm sure we missed many things.
I think the only thing that really comes to mind that I think is practically helpful for therapists, but also conceptually useful, is that when a trans person hopefully feels comfortable to share the feeling that you described of feeling disgusting, or like a wrongness or a badness or a discomfort, or the response doesn't need to be verbatim, but the response should be, well, of course, no wonder. How could you not? And because that doesn't come from inside.
Yeah.
So I often find myself saying, not directly in response to someone talking about those really uncomfortable feelings, but how many trans people do you know meaningfully? You can't expect that you have a level of self-acceptance and okayness in yourself when you know no trans people, or 20 trans people.
Yeah.
Even, like, representation is misunderstood, I think, minimized, but it's really about, we're social beings, we need to see, and not just see, but like have meaningful relationships with other people who are not the same as us, but different in the same way that we're different. And
different in the same way we're different.
Yeah. And so all of the things that trans people suffer, I mean, representation is the only intervention that I know that is healing and appropriate at every single stage of a person's quote-unquote transition. They're at the mitigation stage or the healing stage. Representation is the thing that always is needed.
That's so helpful. How could you not be feeling that way? It was so good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Karen Miller is more than just a not-for-profit organization. It's a vibrant community of students, clients, staff, alumni, and generous donors. Our hearts beat for better mental health, which has driven us for over 60 years. At CMI, we believe in a dynamic interplay between training, research, and clinical practice. These three pillars form our triple helix, each strengthening and informing the other as a registered health promotion charity. We've been pioneers in counselling and psychotherapy in Australia, and our purpose is to enhance mental health through accessible psychological services and innovative professional education. That's where How's That Working For You comes in. This podcast is our way of sharing the extraordinary insights, anecdotes, and life lessons from the mental health field. We're pulling back the curtain to offer you a unique peek behind the scenes, aiming to deepen your understanding of this remarkable space. I'm a senior lecturer at CMI. I'm a feminist psychotherapist, supervisor, and researcher. I've worked in agencies and in private practice, and I've trained in a number of modalities, including emotion-focused therapy and existential psychotherapy, and I have a primary interest in anti-oppressive practice. Thank you for listening to How's That Working For You, a podcast for the therapy curious. This has been your host, Dr. Zoe Krupka. This podcast is a space for open conversations, but it's important to remember that what you're hearing are the personal experiences and thoughts of me and of our guests. While we're here to share insights, please don't take any of this as advice. We're all wonderfully unique, so if you have therapeutic concerns, it's best to chat with your healthcare professional. This podcast was brought to you by the Karen Miller Institute. For more information about our organization, the services we offer, and how to donate, visit our website at cmi.edu.au. You can find links and more information about each guest in our episode show notes. Find us on all major podcast platforms and stay tuned for more inspiring episodes.